Nice little holder over here. I like that. It's like being in the car. My name's Eric. I'm an alcoholic. I've been kept sober since April 5th of 2006. And thank you, Terry, for asking me to speak. It's always, even though it may not feel like it at the time, I know in my head that it's a gift to get asked, because I don't know, I'm probably not the only one where that first thought is often, I'm sure I've got something to do that night, is the first thought, and then I go with the second thought, which is say yes. But it's even I don't know how to say this, but it's even more of a gift when someone who you really respect in Alcoholics Anonymous asks you, and I listen and watch you as well, so listen to and watch you as well. I'm not like nervous, but we were on the way over here, and I was just like, I just don't know what I have to share, and I went to have dinner with my husband and my sponsor, and I was sharing something that I had heard a coworker say. We were having a meeting, and we were talking about like, I'm in marketing, and so it was like retail trends and things like that. But he used this expression, or he used a metaphor or whatever. He said, it's like right now we all feel like we're in wet cement, trying to find that footing and whatever it is in your life, right? Whether it's work, personal, feeling safe, all of that. He said, but the good thing about wet cement is that it's the perfect time to reset and maybe even reposition. And I thought that was something really, interesting to ponder in terms of, trying to find your footing in the times in which we live. So, anyways, I just drew a blank. I'm going to let it pass. Join me. I'll start. I know what I was going to say is if there's anything I say tonight that you can't reconcile with the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, please feel free to disregard it. I know sometimes it's my natural setting to kind of want to be different, right? Want to be unique. It's like I come here and it's like, it's not that I'm like rehearsing what I'm going to say, but I'm thinking about all the little anecdotes, right? Oh, I want to tell that story because that's funny. And this one's really this one really tugs at the heartstrings, because I want that full range of emotion from you tonight. I want you to cry. I want you to laugh. I want you to leave here and feel moved and enlightened. And that's just my ego. And the truth is, I was told once, as long as we all stay sober here for this 1 hour, you've done your job, and that's really all we're doing. So I'll start at the beginning. There are drugs in my story. I am also a member of Crystal Meth Anonymous, but I will do my best to respect the traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous. But like I said, there are a lot of other substances, but for me it was always about not what the problem is, but what the solution is, and it's spiritual, was the answer to all of them. So I try not to get bogged down in the beginning here, because I got to lay some foundation that's important in terms of what I came into when I was born. So my mom got pregnant with me when she was 14. No one knew who the father was. She wouldn't kind of come clean about it. She was, I guess to use the phrase, she was she was basically an alcoholic. I mean, she did the same shit I did. People called her a wild child and what have you back in the day. But, and so she had me when she was 15. She has a sister, my aunt, and a brother. Neither of them had ever had kids. And then there was my grandmother, who had been divorced since before I was born. I do know that my mom's dad was also an alcoholic, and the only time I ever heard my grandmother talk about him, she said he was a good man until he drank. And so alcoholism absolutely runs in my family. So when I was growing up as a kid, my mother got further and further into her alcoholism and ultimately drug addiction. She got very heavy into meth and speed and shooting up and stuff like that. The other thing too is the father situation. So when I was born, my grandmother was really, really distraught about it. This was 1970, and living in a small town in the South, it's like having a child that, was out of wedlock and having a kid, and especially at that age. And my grandmother worked with a guy who was in his 20s who, from what I understand, they were just really close. He looked up to her as a mentor. I think she was his manager, whatever. And I don't know where and when this happens, but apparently he said, hey, if it would help, I'll marry your daughter on paper so that there is a name for your grandson, as long as you promise, obviously, not to, pursue anything against me in terms of, and so there was an agreement made, and so I was given his last name. So you can imagine, as I was growing up, this mystery. It was, yes, your dad's name was Tommy, but that was it. There were no pictures. We didn't talk about it. I found out years later that my grandmother there was kind of a mandate on the family. She was kind of like the matriarch of the family, and she was like, no one speaks of this. It's his mother's job to tell him. And of course, she never told me and never revealed. So I grew up with this, do I have a dad? Who is he? Why does no one have any pictures? Why won't anybody talk about? And I would ask questions, and it would get, the conversation would get changed. Oh, well, Tommy died. And I'm like, well, how did he die? And where did he die? And again, why aren't there any pictures? Did no one take pictures? You have pictures of like you sunbathing by the pool, but you don't have pictures of my dad, So that was challenging. So growing up with my mom, well, just imagine growing up with a meth addict. That was life with my mom. When I first came into Alcoholics Anonymous in '98, and I was not ready to think about any part I had in anything, but I started listening to all of this stuff, and I'm like, you guys called it alcoholism, I called it mom, because that was literally what I grew up with, being in that tornado, that chaos, the collateral damage. My mom liked really rough men, and I don't mean like in the kind of hot, sexy, hot man way. We're talking like biker, drug dealers, people who, it was regularly that people within my mom's close circle of friends would disappear because they went to prison. And then they'd get out and come back. At one point when I was about 5, the man that my mom was dating went to prison in Leavenworth, Kansas, and we lived in Leavenworth for a year so that she could go have conjugal visits. And she drove a food truck, and I used to drive around with her food truck. And then we lived in Houston, and when he got out of prison, they had a topless bar. And I used to hang out with all the girls before the bar opened at the bar, and I would have my Shirley Temple. I liked Shirley Temples with a lot of cherries in them, so they were really sweet. That theme would continue later in my drinking. I liked really fruity drinks. So there was a lot of that. There was a lot of violence that I was privy to and that I saw happen to my mother and that happened to me. I mean, really horrific things. And I only share this. This isn't, there was a time when I would share this stuff because I wanted how awful I had it. But a lot of my buttons that I carried into my drinking and using were born out of these situations. My mom, when she got further into her drug addiction, she would lock all the doors around the perimeter of our small house. The windows were foiled up. So I'd never know, like I'd be in my room playing with my Star Wars toys, and it's like, and all of a sudden I hear click. And she would have locked the deadbolt and I would be in my room until the paranoia passed, or I would just bang on the door loud enough and say I'm hungry. But I would also store chips and cookies and Twinkies and stuff because I was just surviving. I mean, I didn't think it was really any different. I didn't know what other kids, I do know that I was embarrassed to have kids come and stay because I was so embarrassed of how dirty our house was. I had to check food and sandwiches for roaches. I ate a water bug one time, like one of those big nasty ones down in Baytown, those ones that fly at you. Fucking roaches that fly. It's like my worst nightmare. Sorry, we're in a church too. Anyways, and so this was, you can imagine, and then I got a front row seat to what addiction and alcoholism looks like. And that's really important because for so many years growing up, I didn't want to be her. And I didn't want to be her. I didn't want to be the person. I saw the pain that it caused for my grandmother. My grandmother was a huge enabler, but she was also, for my mom, but she was a bright spot in my growing up. And it's always interesting for me to, Christmas time is always, I think you could pick any day of the year and make the contrast between what it was like when I was drinking and using and when I wasn't. But Christmas time is certainly, because I had so many fond memories, those were the times my grandmother went out of her way to make Christmas really special. I would go and stay with her 2 or 3, every month or so I'd stay with her, and she'd take me to the toy store, and of course I had to pick out my Star Wars toy. If you don't know, I'm a huge Star Wars fan, but it's also because it was my escape as a kid. It was the thing that was always there for me. I read a thing here recently that talked about why kids like that, and they can, especially kids that are in chaotic or traumatic situations, is they create situations for themselves where they're in control. They control the world. They control the storyline. They can, and I would escape into that. I was also very creative as a kid, drawing, art. And what I learned was I had something that I could get validation with. It was something that got me attention in school early on. It was something that made me feel good about myself. That I had something, and I really do think that was a gift from my higher power, because it's something that I hung on to through so much of my drinking and using. And I don't know that if I hadn't had that, that I would have been in that place of having nothing to live for. But and my mom, continued to be the focus of, as I got older into my teens and stuff. Christmas, just to kind of stick on the Christmas theme, Christmas was always like very tense situation, because we'd all be together, and my grandmother would have, meticulous decorations. She had crystal ornaments from Germany, and it was, which I now have on our tree. And, but we would all sit, and there would be this tension seeing if my mom was going to show up or not. And she always showed up. She showed up late. She either didn't feel good, and she had to make a big scene about that, or she was high or drunk. One year, she showed up, and she was actually early, which shocked the hell out of everybody. And then she had gifts, which was an even bigger shock. And so we're all opening gifts, and people handing, I'm playing Santa and handing out the gifts. And I get this one that's like really, really heavy, and I'm like, what is this? And I open it up, and it's this big cut glass crystal ashtray. And it was actually my grandmother's ashtray, because what she had done was she had gotten there early, and she walked around the house and grabbed things and wrapped them and put them under the tree with people's names. So that was Mom. Yeah. But anyways, and so as I got older, enough about Mom. That's what my first sponsor said, going through my 4-step, enough about Mom. So as I was getting older, alcohol was it was always around. Drugs were always around. I saw people snort Coke off the dining table. I saw, obviously like pot smoking and drinking and all of that. A lot of sexual trauma, I would say, not so much physical abuse sexually, but from what I was exposed to, conversations I was privy to, things I was shown, things I saw. So there was, and again, this isn't like pity party for me, but, emotional, physical, sexual, abuse in some form. But at the time, it didn't, I don't know, it's weird. At the time, I was, I guess, just resilient and hung on to those things that were good. But so as I got older, I started hanging out with, of course, this was in the late 80s, and, I had to be part of the goth group, the fringe, who, rebels without a cause, and who would intentionally dress up for attention, black eyeliner, spiked hair, all black, studs and safety pins, and stand at the mall at the main fountain in Longview, Texas, and just scowl at people. And then when they'd walk by and look, he'd be like, "What are you looking at?" And they're like, "Well, you." Like, but when you hang out with that group, You get, I got exposed to, it was literally like a subscription to the like drug of the month, club. By the time I was 18, I had pretty much done everything up to and including things like inhaling Freon, Scotchgard, spray paint, but of course like acid, X, crystal. I never did heroin. I think that's the only one that I never checked off the list. But so to me, it was just a given, the drinking, but the drugs were really, when those came along, in combination with the drinking, were, I don't know, it was when I kind of started feeling like I wasn't so reliant on the people around me to feel okay about myself. Because that's really one of the things that I took when you grow up with an addict or an alcoholic as a parent. You're constantly in that mode of, what do I need to do to make you okay with me? Because there was always this, and that's where that creativity and artisticness, whatever you want to call it, really came in handy, because I really sought that approval and validation, like at school and what have you, and then later in life through work. So did a lot of experimenting with stuff, going through high school. And again, as I kind of got older and my mom's disease progressed even worse, and attention was really always on her. And so again, I got a really front and center look at what it looks like and the pain that it can cause, and yet I still craved and wanted it. And I think that was, looking back, yes, I went through some tough stuff, and a lot of, there was a time when I'd be like, well, if you'd been through what I've been through, you'd drink and use too. Like almost like I had a right to do it because what I'd been through. But then I kind of started, once I got sober, I was like, yeah, but with what you saw, you also had just as much reason not to do it, So anyway, so as I got older, I did, I hear a lot of stories where it was like the first time I drank, I got drunk and it was just a downhill spiral from there. That wasn't the case for me. I did go through a period for about 10 years where I would just, I'd drink and use on the weekends. I did really well in my career. I was very alcoholic in my behavior, very bad with money, writing hot checks. I, at any point, was getting, multiple, I'd get those red envelopes in the mail because the check had bounced, and have to by the time my paycheck would come, I'd have so many overdraft fees that there wouldn't be much of it left, so my grandmother was constantly funding everything for me. And she was like, when my mom kind of fell away out of the picture because of her own addiction, my grandmother was like a mom and a dad, rolled up in one. She was, the gift throughout my childhood and into my adult life. But so had a lot of, like I said, alcoholic behavior, wrecked some cars, ran into a bank one time because we were sniffing the spray stuff that you huff driving down the road, and I just blacked out. And I came to, and my friend was like tugging on my shirt, and he's like, Eric. And I'm like, what? He's like, we just crashed into a bank. And we did. We went, it was in Houston, Texas. We went over 4 lanes of traffic, over a median, broke 2 axles and slammed into the drive-through of a bank. So it was, and I'm shocked, to be honest, that I made it through all that alive. But it was in 1995. I had lived in Chicago briefly. I moved up there because a guy was there, and that didn't work out, so I moved back. And I took a job here in Dallas at an ad agency, and I wasn't there long because I got into a fight, as I did usually with people, because it was the Eric show, and when you got in my light, I had an issue with you, and especially at work. One of the last reviews that I ever got at work, my boss was very frank with me, and she said, "You're very good at what you do," and she said, "But no one wants to do it with you." That was how that was my kind of behavior and what I was known for at work in a nutshell. But around 1995, so that I, ended that job and I started working for myself, and I had huge success. A lot of money, but I also started using a combination of drugs and alcohol to work longer, to work harder, work smarter. And as the book talks about, gradually things got worse. I got an opportunity. I was hanging out with a group of friends who were also using like 95, 96, 97. And they had progressed because I had moved away for a year and then come back, and I hadn't used or drank during that time. And they had progressed severely in their drug use to the point where living out of cars or living in kind of vacated, empty apartments with sheets up over their windows. And it was something that gave me a lot of like peace of mind that I wasn't that bad. Right? I still had curtains. I literally had that thought one time that was like, I was at someone's house and I'm like, well, at least I have curtains, and those were, that was, so they were going down really fast. And then one day, one of them said, hey, we're going to go to this called Lambda group, AA, and you should come with us. And this was one of those things where it was like, I was not done yet, but I had all these friends hitting bottom. And so they were like, why don't you come to one of these meetings with us? And so I went to one of the meetings, and my first thought was like, wow, this is an untapped pool of men that like that I'd never seen any of you out at the bars, and because I'd made my way around, and so anyways, that tells you right there how receptive I was to sobriety, but. Anyways, so I actually did everything, I'm a smart guy, and it's funny when Cherry was introducing me and talking about someone who has an understanding of recovery and the steps, and I thought about what my spontane's like, what he's really saying is you're an overthinker. Because I am. I like to think about stuff, and sometimes that's good and sometimes it's not. But I looked at all the steps and I thought, well, I can do all that. And, I was that person that like did them all in my head. And I really thought this would be good therapy. That's what I thought. I thought, I've been through some shit with my mom. This will be a good way for me to work some of that out and talk to someone about it. It never dawned on me that it was about looking at what's up with me, my thinking, my behavior, taking responsibility for what my life had become. But frankly, my life hadn't gotten as bad as it would get. But I actually got a sponsor. He was a straight guy. His name was John. He lived over in Park Cities, and I went over to his house, and he was very old school. And I had a binder, and I printed out and designed title pages for all the sections, and like resentments had a real ugly burglar kind of look to them, and yeah, it was again like I even offered to redesign and typeset some of the Xeroxed instructions he gave me, which he declined, but I was like, these are really hard to read. They've been Xeroxed too many times. Anyways, but went through all the steps, and I actually stayed sober. I did it very, very much in my head, very scholarly, I would say, very thorough with the resentments, lots and lots of again, it was really about, I needed someone to hear what had happened to me. That's really what it was. It was basically, therapy. And so I stayed sober. I decided to go back to work. I had a headhunter who reached out to me and said there's another opportunity in Chicago. I moved to Chicago. Things are great. I'm making great money. Still can't afford to I'm still having to get money from my grandmother constantly. I'm so just irresponsible because, I have to have $600 shoes, and I have to it's just all this crazy alcoholic behavior. But when I got there, I was there for about 6 months. I did not get connected. I didn't think about sobriety as something that I thought you did it and you're like, great, I'm done with that. Now I can move on, right? And so that's what I did when I got to Chicago, and I moved on. And before you know it, I was lonely. I didn't know anybody there. Well, where do you go when you're lonely and you don't know anybody? go to a gay bar. And started going to gay bars. And it's like, well, alcohol was never really the problem for me. It was really, the crystal and, the X and the G, and it was all this other stuff that I used to use when I was working for myself to stay up for days on ends and work. But I never really had a problem with drinking. And so I decided to start drinking. And of course, you drink enough, you run into people who have other stuff. And so that started back that whole process. I really, really hit a hard bottom in Chicago. There were times when I was kicked out of one bar because I passed out or blacked out. Two people, when I woke up, I was at home in my bed, and I was like, it was surreal, like. To black out knowing you're one place and then to wake up at home in your bed. And I got up and I walked into the living room and there were two guys sitting there and they were watching my TV and they jumped up and they're like, oh my God, we thought you were dead because of all the drugs and the alcohol that I was on. And I'm like, who are you? How did I get home? And they told me the story. They found me crawling on my hands and knees in an alley, moaning and incoherent. And this is, I don't know that I necessarily believe in guardian angels. I think I was lucky. These guys managed to get my wallet, find out where I lived. They got me in a cab. They took me to my house. They walked me up to my apartment, actually went and got donuts and came back while they were sitting there waiting for me to come to. The best part is that when I walked out of my bedroom and saw them sitting there and they told me that, my next comment was, well, y'all want to hang out and party? Yeah. You didn't know that one, did you? So anyways, but the real, and it's all funny in hindsight, the true kind of pit of demoralization that happened when I was in Chicago is one day my grandmother called me and I was at work, and she told me that she had stage 4 cancer, and I literally fell on the floor. I felt like that the earth had been ripped out from underneath me. And I worked at a great place, and they were like, we're putting you on a plane, we're sending you home. And so I went home because she had to go in immediately. They found cancer in 4 spots in her body, and like blood and brain, kidney, and lung. And she had to have the one on her brain removed immediately. And so I was there. I managed to pull my act together, but I was daily using at this point. I was drinking when I'd get home from work to take the edge off. I was usually up all night, so I would do my powdered alcohol in the morning to get to work. I'd go to work really, really early, so everybody thought I was a hard worker because they'd get there and I was already there. I'd leave for like 3 or 4 hour lunches, go home, get high more, come back to work, stay late so that everybody left, then come home and then drink and do a combination. And that was really my daily, until I literally would just collapse and not show up for work for a day or two. And, obviously I was sick and didn't feel well. But anyway, so I went down and saw my grandmother for that operation, and I came back. That was the last time I saw her. She quickly, her health quickly declined from there. She had a bad fall, and I get a call from a friend of mine who's actually someone who got sober with me, and he was still living here in Texas, and he said, you need to come home and see your grandmother. He's like, she's not going to last much longer. He's like, he had stayed sober, and obviously I had gone back out, and he's like, I'm going to buy you a plane ticket. Just show up at the airport and get on a plane and come home. That day came as I was coming to in someone's house that I didn't know. I couldn't find my clothes. I looked at my watch, and I needed to be at the airport in an hour, and there was no way I was going to get there. And I called and talked to my aunt, and 2 days later, my grandmother died. And so I was unable obviously, to get home and see her. And that's something that I drank and used over more. Of course, I made it about me, right? And I continued to drink and use over that. When things got really, really bad in Chicago, I decided it was time for me to come back to Dallas. So I came back to Dallas. This was 2004, and this is actually when I knew where to go. I got back to Dallas. I would come in and get 2 months, then 3 months, then 2 months. I had gotten to the point, I managed to hang on to a job and a car, and that was about it. I heard a speaker say one time, it's not that drugs and alcohol kill us, but that they strip away everything that makes living life worthwhile. I don't know why that stuck with me verbatim, but it's a really powerful statement, because you can come in with a car and a house and never having been to prison and be completely spiritually, emotionally bankrupt and wanting to die. And that kept me out of the rooms for a really long time, because I thought those were things you had to check off the list to be a real alcoholic. And the truth is the book talks, the thing that made me throw my big book the first time was that statement that says we were having trouble with personal relationships. We were a prey to misery. We had a feeling of uselessness. We couldn't make a living. It was all those things, and I was like, that's me. Because when I got my first big book, I flipped through for the chart, right? These are the things you need to know to be an alcoholic. And I'm a very visual person. I like charts, but there wasn't one. So I had gotten where I had contracted MRSA, really bad staph infections, and because I had my, obviously maybe from some of the places I was visiting and, hygiene, but also my immune system was so beaten down with the drugs and alcohol and how often I was using. I used to come home at night just as the sun was coming up, because I thought, like, if I could get into bed before the sun rose, that it was more acceptable, right? That I wasn't out driving the streets as the sun was coming up. And I had moments during that time where I now look back and I know they were spiritual moments. I can remember driving down Harry Hines at 4 a.m, as you do, looking for the party. I knew there was a party somewhere. And I would drive around, looking for it. And I remember one time I was driving, the street was completely empty, and of course I get a red light, and I'm like, so I'm sitting in a red light, music blaring, brains going 90 to nothing, and I just hear this loud voice in my head that's just, go home. Just go home, right? And I would get those thoughts often. And, it was inconvenient, right? So around 2006, I had come in and out for so long from Lambda. I had gotten embarrassed, 2 months. Some of you may remember, I was a chronic relapser. And then I decided, after having been out for a little while, to come back, but I wasn't going to go to Lambda, so I went to Sunday Morning Live. And I was standing in the back of the room at Sunday Morning Live and in the double doors, because I would wait till the meeting started so I could just stand there, and then I would leave before it would end. So I'm standing there one day, and Jack Cleary, who was like the matriarch, the grand dame of the meeting at the time. And I say that with all the love in the world, because he may have saved my life, because he would always get up and go back to the coffee room during the meeting, to get coffee or get other people coffee. And he saw me, and I think he'd seen me before, and he came back and spotted me. And he said, "Hi, what's your name?" And I said, "Eric." And he's like, "I'm Jack." Of course, it was a little hard to understand him, but he's like, "Could you stay after the meeting and help me?" And I'm like, shit. I was like, sure, this little old man, I should stay and help. So the meeting ends, and he comes back and he hands me a roll of paper towels and a bottle of Windex and says, "Just clean the women's and men's bathrooms." And I was horrified. Not only had I sunk so low to come to Alcoholics Anonymous, but I was now going to be cleaning the bathrooms. And he said, "Are you going to be," and I was done. And of course I did a very good job of it, because I'm like, well, I'm going to clean the hell out of this bathroom. So I cleaned the bathroom, and then, and he's like, "Are you going to be here next weekend?" And I said, Sure, but in my mind, like, telling him what I thought he wanted to hear. But anyways, and so I go home, a week passes, I stay sober somehow, just kind of white-knuckling it. And Sunday morning comes around, and of course I wake up, because I'm going to bed now, like a normal person, and I wake up, and I had that thought, oh shit, you told him you're going to be there. And it's like, so I show up again and clean the bathrooms. And I had that commitment for 3 years, and until I gave it to a sponsee. But like, this is your job now. But the things that stood in my way, just to kind of get into my recovery and the steps, but the things that got in my way, first and foremost, was self-reliance. As I said, as I was growing up, I learned that I couldn't rely on anybody but myself. I certainly didn't believe in anything spiritual. There wasn't any aspect of spiritual or religion or anything that was ever discussed in our house. It just wasn't part of it. I would hear things about kids doing stuff like, oh, they go to that church thing on Sunday. But to me, that was like the kids that also went on summer vacations. I mean, I never went to the lake or did anything like that. So it just wasn't, it's like it was this thing over there, but I just didn't see how it was relevant to me. And if there was something, why the hell didn't it show up for me all those years as a kid? Why did I go through all that? What I know now is my grandmother was there, my aunt was there, and I made it through it all and got sober. And I mean, if you can't look at it big picture like that and see, a power greater than myself. But that was a thing that stood in the way, and also that just fear of what others think. Those were probably the two things that really, those buttons that came out of childhood with me. But so I went through the steps, got a new sponsor. Her name was Danny F. And she was a tough lesbian sponsor, and I say that with all the love in the world. But no, she was just one of those people that she was just very matter of fact, I've always picked sponsors that when I hear them speak, they make me a little bit uncomfortable with the level of honesty that they have and frankness. I don't need someone else that condones my overthinking, and I tend to be a little more emotional slant, and so I need that directness. But what I learned from her was the concept of action. I used to always think that it's like I'm going to do that when the feeling hits me, and she taught me that concept of action, that we take the action and the feeling follows. And the same was true with my recovery. And we went through the steps, and one of the she had me get a little dictionary because she said, you have a lot of baggage and you think you know things that you don't really know. And she said, I want you to, every time we go through a step, I want you to, any of the words that can be looked up, look them up and find a definition that works for you. And so, powerlessness, the only thing I knew about powerlessness is all the times my electricity got cut off, when I didn't pay the bills. But the idea of that, when I do something that I say I'm not going to do, right? The unmanageability was an inability to get a desired outcome. So no matter what I thought I was going to be able to do, I could never get there, right? That was what unmanageability was. I had a problem with step 2 with the insanity. I didn't think I was insane. And she kind of called me out on that, and she said, well, what do you think insanity is? And I said, well, it's someone who's locked up in a padded cell in a straitjacket. And she said, all right, well, let's go with that thought. Why are they locked up in a padded cell in a straitjacket? And I said, well, because they can't keep from hurting themselves or others. And she said, and she said, and that's not you? And so it was stuff like that going through. I also, obviously, as I said, I really struggled with the higher power thing. And she said, why don't we do this? Anytime you see the word God, higher power, any reference to a higher power, just replace it with the words, the steps. So made a decision to turn my will and life over to the care of the steps. Came to believe that the steps could restore me to sanity. And she said that she believed that there was a power greater than all of us working in the steps. The ability that it has to transform lives and to keep people sober. And she said that she believed that if I worked all the steps, that by the time I got to step 12, I would have a higher power tailor-made for me. And she said, I just need you, to trust me and do the work with me. When I went through my first fourth step, obviously there was a lot of stuff in there, a lot of stuff I'd never said to anybody. When we were done, she looked at me, and it was the first time working with her, and she stood up and she gave me a hug and she said, I love you. And I try to do that now with all my sponsees when we do a fourth step. And it was very awkward, and it's still very awkward to say I love you because, I don't know. But it was to share all that and then have someone tell you they love you no matter what is really powerful. I wanted to obviously went through the rest of the steps. Sorry, I spent so much time on the beginning. I did everything I said I wasn't going to do. So there's a lesson in expectations. I have to tell you the story about my expectation experience, so really quickly. So we had decided we wanted to do, well, I decided I wanted to have that experience of like riding in the big romantic carriage through Highland Park and see the lights and the clip clop, of the horses and hooves. So I booked this thing for us and 3 other couples and hype it all up. We're going to do this. We're going to have cookies. We're going to have all this stuff. We get there and we're waiting to get checked in, and there's these 2 beautiful horses. Big, the big wooden, curly, curvy, fancy Cinderella carriages. I start walking that way. I have this vision of this night we're going to have with our friends. And the woman's like, oh, you're over here. And I didn't book unknowingly. I was booking it so fast. I actually booked what's called the Jolly Trolley, which is a golf cart that was wrapped in tinsel. And our driver was dressed in a reindeer outfit. And she was just dancing like, it's a holly jolly, like she was doing that, blaring music, and it had a really bad exhaust pipe. So as we're driving through Highland Park, it's like, but it's all good. I mean, but that's expectations, right? So I just to jump forward. So this year I will have 16 years. What I can tell you is that anything that the longer I stay with Alcoholics Anonymous and continue that path, the more I get that I truly need to be happy, joyous, and free. And one of my favorite things about the promises that I didn't actually really pick up on until later, and I noticed in the first promise the word new. And it kind of clicked with me that it wasn't about just freedom and happiness in the way I used to think about it, which used to be freedom would be leave me alone, right? I need freedom from all this shit that is a pain. And happiness was getting what I wanted, drugs, alcohol, time to go do what I wanted to do. And I love that the promise says a new freedom and a new happiness. And the new freedom is freedom from me. Freedom from this, and I get that, working with others, being of service, and the happiness is that willingness to find happiness and joy in new places, and I have certainly been given that gift as well. And my current sponsor, the ongoing journey is how free do you want to be, and I always, when I got to step 10, and because I like to check lists off, and I'm like, done, and I get to step 10, and it's like, continue. And I asked my sponsor, I'm like, for how long? It's like, and so it has been an incredible journey at, I guess it was in 2012. I had moved back to Chicago in 2010. And I took a job, took a title demotion, took a job that I didn't think was going to really lead anywhere, but I needed to go back to work. I had been working for myself for a couple of years. I lost my job in 2008. Anyways, another story. But I took this job, and it has opened up career opportunities that I could have never imagined. Had I picked the job that I thought I needed, I would have missed out on so much. But I was living in Chicago, and I'd always been in the Roundup for the first few years of my recovery. For the first 4 years, I was involved with the Roundup. And so I wanted to come home for the Roundup, and I came home for the Roundup. And I'd always told sponsees, do not go to Roundups looking for romances, the Roundup romance. And, the odds are good, or what is it? The goods are odd, but the odds are good, right? And so I came to the Roundup, and I had already signed up to help with the show, Saturday night, whatever. And I'm in the ballroom setting up for the show, and this guy walks in, and I was like, oh my God. And we met, and we had lunch, and we spent some time together over the weekend. And as he was walking away, I had the thought that, now that's the kind of guy I could spend the rest of my life with. Now, I didn't think it would be him, because I lived in Chicago and he lived here in Dallas and what have you, but things just kind of came together without me having to be the master of the chessboard. In my company, my boss knew that I was seeing somebody, and he worked things out so I could relocate back, and we just celebrated our 5th wedding anniversary. And, my sponsor married us. He's an ordained minister now, if you don't know, so you can call him Minister Duncan. I just want to close on this story, because it kind of, obviously, I talked a lot about my grandmother, and I could spend a whole night talking about everything that she did, the kind of woman that she was, the kind of morals and values, and the person that she was in her own community that I didn't even touch on. But well into my recovery, I really struggled with that. Making that amend, how to make that amend. I've gotten really close with my aunt. She's like my mom. About 4 years into recovery, I had to sever relationships with my mother, even though I tried to be a good son for the first 4 years of recovery. It's been very toxic. She had neighbors calling me, telling me what a horrible son I was, things like that. So it got really, really bad. But anyways, I was about 3 years sober, and I got asked to speak way up north. I think it was Clean Air North. And I'd never been there before. I didn't know anybody there. And I told my story, and similar to tonight, I talked quite a bit about my grandmother, and that she had passed, and that I was never able to make it home, and how much pain that gave me, and how much resentment towards myself I had over that. So anyways, I shared about that in the story, and then of course afterwards people are coming up to thank me and what have you. And the very, very last woman is pulling an oxygen tank on a little dolly. And she came up to me, and she put both her hands on my hands, and she said, I want you to know your grandmother would be very proud of you. And of course at the time I'm like, oh, that's nice, sweet old lady telling me that, it's all okay. And I said, I really appreciate that. What's your name? And she said, my name's Val. And my grandmother's name was Val. And, and it's like I tell that story, and you could think that it's corny, but I don't know. Like, those kinds of things have happened to me the longer I've stayed around, is I get those little moments of healing. I get those little moments of you're on the right path. I actually, the next weekend was at... 2 weeks later, I was at Sunday Morning Live, and Val's husband was there, and I think he spoke. I could be wrong, but I think he was speaking, and he talked, and I went up to him, and I said, your wife. I saw your wife a couple of weeks ago when I spoke, and he said, well, she passed away. And there's just something, I don't know, there's something kind of mystical and magical that, I would speak at a place where a woman who wouldn't be around for another 2 weeks, who happened to hear me speak, who happened to have the same name as my grandmother, who happened to take the time to come up to me and tell me that my grandmother would be proud of me. I mean, I don't know where else you could go and have those kinds of experiences, but if you haven't had those, stick around. It's been my experience that most people I've known that have been sober for any time have those kinds of experiences. And I know that because I've heard them share them as well. And so thank you again, Terry, for asking me to speak. I appreciate the opportunity to talk tonight, and thanks.